Shortly after 3 a.m., Tara Pakanich was woken by a slammed door. She went downstairs to check and see if it was her son and noticed a plastic bucket seated at the foot of the stairs. It was covered with a blanket. She stopped, pulled back the blanket, and looked something in the eye that would haunt her for the rest of her life. A bloody bucket in which sat the severed head of her 24-year-old son, Shad Thyrion. This is the worst sight that a mother could see. What monster would not only murder someone but decapitate their head and put it in a bucket? What was her son involved in? Who was the person who slammed the door? These are serious questions that need answers now. Officers of the Brown County Police Department arrived at the home in minutes of Tara calling 911. A tearful Tara led detectives to the offensive bucket that held her son's head. As they inspected it, they found out that the bucket contained a lot more body parts than just the head. Inside the container were a male organ, bodily fluids, several body parts, and 2 knives. Shad Thyrion lived in his mother's basement, which held many signs that something terrible had happened within its walls. A nearby mattress was soaked in blood. The floor's concrete surface had blood streaks, evidence of a botched cleanup, and in the stand-up shower of a nearby bathroom, there was blood. The grisly dismemberment had undoubtedly occurred in the home's basement. After obtaining a search warrant for the Stony Brook home, investigators started conducting a thorough examination of the crime scene and quickly located plastic shopping bags that held more body parts and 3 knives, including a bread knife. They also found his upper torso crammed into a storage tote, as well as another carving knife and several internal organs. A glass pipe and a bag containing white powder were among the drug-related items they also found. An autopsy determined Shad had been strangled to death. There were several rigid cuts where his head had been removed. Someone had determinedly taken him apart piece by piece using nothing but kitchen knives. Why would anyone be so eager to want this 24-year-old dead? Investigators approached his mother for help in finding out about Shad's last days. Tara said the last time she had seen Shad alive was 2 days earlier on Monday the 21st at around 9:30 p.m. A friend of his had pulled up outside in a minivan she hadn't seen before. There were 2 other people in the vehicle, one she did not recognize, but she was quite familiar with the other person in the driver's seat. She and her son had gone to school together. Her name was Taylor Shaw Business. The 3 of them left together in the minivan. That was the last time she'd laid eyes on her son. However, the following day, the minivan was back outside the house. In the wee hours of the morning, Tara's boyfriend had let Shad and Shaw Business into the house. There was no sign of a third person. The 2 had gone down to Shad's room in the basement. Later that morning, she overheard a female voice speaking in the basement. She quickly recognized it as Shaw Business's, but she chose not to go down there to see how the 2 were doing. When she left the house with her boyfriend, the minivan was still parked outside. Tara admitted that she had gone for most of the day. When she returned home, the minivan was still parked outside. Between 2:30 and 3 a.m., the sound of a storm door slamming shut woke her up. Shortly after, she heard a vehicle start and drive off. Tara assumed Shaw Business had left in the minivan and was going back to sleep when she noticed the basement lights turned on. Had Shad left with Shaw Business? On a whim, she went back downstairs to check. There was no sign of Shad. Unconcerned, Tara had started back up the stairs when her eyes landed on the bucket and she made the heinous discovery. As the last person to see him alive, Taylor Shaw Business became a person of interest. Taylor Shaw Business was not her given name. She was born Taylor Denise Coronado, but changed her name in 2018. Like Shad, she attended Howard Swamico schools where the 2 met and became friends and drug buddies. Like Shad, she also did not graduate. In 2017, she started dating and eventually married Warren Shaw Business. At the time of the murder, he was in jail for unrelated charges. In 2021, the 2 had welcomed the birth of a son. His name was Mateo, and even though he was less than a year old, Shaw Business did not have custody of the child. Shaw Business had a long history of arrests in Brown County. In June 2020, she was charged with threatening a law enforcement officer and resisting arrest. She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years of probation and 60 days in jail. 2 months later, Shaw Business was back in court for another set of charges for bail and jumping and resisting an officer. The bail jumping charge was dismissed as part of the June case, but again in August 2020, she was charged with misdemeanor possession of drug paraphernalia. resisting an officer, and felony fleeing from an officer in a vehicle. She was sentenced to 2 more years of probation. She was still on probation and was to have an ankle monitor on all times. Through her court records, investigators found out that she lived on Eastman Avenue in Green Bay, Brown County. Officers got to the address. Right away, they saw a minivan outside the apartment that matched Tara's description. As they inspected the minivan, a woman emerged from a nearby apartment complex. She was a 5'2" brunette that weighed about 120 pounds. Immediately, she caught sight of the officers. She stopped in her tracks. Officers spotted her at the same time. From her mugshot, they easily identified Taylor Shabiznis. She had on a black hooded sweatshirt and black sweatpants. As the officers approached her, they noticed what appeared to be dried blood on the front of her clothes. Her hands were also smeared with blood. When officers asked her why she thought they were there, she said, "Because of my warrant for arrest?" While Shabiznis was taken into custody for breaching the terms of her probation, investigators wasted no time pouring through the minivan. The actual owner of the vehicle turned out to be Shabiznis' roommate. In the rear passenger seat behind the driver's seat, on top of a laundry basket of cloth, another horrifying find was made: a box with human legs. Shabiznis just became a prime suspect in Shad's murder. Back at the station, officers found that Shabiznis had a cut on her left thumb and scratches on her arms and hands. When they asked her about it, she said that they were all self-inflicted injuries. They also found blood smudges on her hands. Officers started the interrogation by informing her that the head of Shad Thyrion had been found in a home in Green Bay. "That is pretty effed up," the 24-year-old mother said. Through a series of questions, Shabiznis admitted that she knew Shad and the minivan at her house was her roommate's van. She had driven it back home earlier that day, and apart from his legs, the rest of Shad's body was still in the basement of the house. Detectives were curious to know if anyone else had been with them that day. Shabiznis was adamant that it was just her and the victim in the basement. When police interviewed Shabiznis and asked her what happened, Shabiznis replied, "That is a good question." Calmly and coldly, Shabiznis walked the detectives through everything that had transpired. It all started on Monday, February 22nd. Shabiznis cut off her ankle monitor and decided it was time to have some fun. She drove her roommate's minivan to pick up a friend. At 9 p.m., she arrived at Shad's mother's house and picked him up as well. The three went off to get drugs and headed back to her Eastman Avenue apartment, where they all smoked marijuana together. The friend later left, leaving Shad and Shabiznis to their shenanigans. The two started to smoke meth and later shot up themselves with trazodone, a powerful sedative. In the early hours of Tuesday, February 23rd, the two got into a minivan and left Shabiznis' Eastman apartment for Shad's mother's house. Tara's boyfriend let them into the house and they went directly to the basement and smoked some more meth. Shad soon brought out a set of silver chains like a dog choke collar. One was for him, the other for her. Strangulation, she claimed, was a common theme in their sexual encounters. Shad lay face down on the bed in the basement and Shabiznis sat on his back. She eased the chain around his neck and pulled. At this point, she claimed to have blacked out. When she came to, Shad was struggling against her grip and trying desperately to get her off of him, but Shabiznis did not ease up. According to her, she had already gone this far. She could not stop now. But she admitted she also got some pleasure watching him. Even when Shad started to cough out blood, Shabiznis did not loosen her grip. She continued to pull at the chains. Shad's heart was beating wildly and his face was now purple from suffocation. Shabiznis wondered why he wouldn't just die and pulled even harder. Eventually, 4 minutes after the chain had been put around his neck, Shad succumbed to his injuries and died. Shabiznis held the chain around his throat for some minutes even after she knew he was dead. When detectives asked her if she enjoyed killing him, she unabashedly said, "Yeah, I liked it." But Shabiznis was not done yet. She got a dildo and performed unspeakable hideous acts on Shad's body, including oral acts. This went on for the next 3 hours. She walked upstairs to the kitchen to look for knives to use to sever his body. After many trials and errors with the different knives, she settled on a bread knife with a serrated blade. Quote, "It cut better," she said. Shad placed a toad on the floor and using a bucket to catch any blood, she began her macabre task. When the bucket was full of blood, she emptied it into the basement shower. From Tuesday into Wednesday morning, while honest people lay fast asleep, Shad was hard at work cutting up Shad's body to pieces. As she said this, she laughed and told the investigators that they were going to have fun trying to find all the organs of Shad's body. The next stage of her plan was to remove all the bodily parts and dispose of them. But after taking his legs to the car, the woman who had spent hours dissecting Shad limb from limb got lazy and gave up. At 3 a.m., Shad hightailed it out of the house with just his legs, making such a racket that Tara's mom was woken only to find her son's dismembered body minutes later. "Damn the head," she said regretfully. "I can't believe I left the head though." The detectives asked her where she had kept it, and she told him she had put Shad's head in a black bucket along with his male organ, a knife, and some other internal organs and placed a blanket over it. She also told them that the knives she had used were in a shopping bag along with some of Shad's body parts. His upper torso and several internal organs would be in storage tote along with a carving knife, while his legs were in a crock-pot box on top of a laundry basket of clothes in the rear passenger seat of the minivan. Shad's account of what happened matched for everything investigators had seen in the basement. She was placed under arrest and charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and third-degree sexual assault. Shad was remanded in custody after entering a non-guilty plea on the grounds of insanity. She's deemed a flight risk and her bond had been set to a whopping $2 million since she took off the ankle monitor she was supposed to wear as part of her probation for the 2020 charges. The trial that would decide her fate was slated for March 6, 2023, but the question of Shad's fitness to stand trial has been a central issue of her court proceedings since she was arrested. Back in April 2022, a state evaluation found Shad competent enough to stand trial, but her lawyer rejected the state's findings. She was adamant that Shad has been receiving mental health treatment since the 7th grade, was psychiatrically hospitalized multiple times, and was even diagnosed with bipolar and psychotic disorders. Shad sat calmly in court, listening attentively, and even smiled at the camera. The judge gave him permission for her to undergo the second psychiatric evaluation, but not on taxpayers' pockets since one had already been done. On February 14, 2023, almost a year to the day of the grisly murder, the Green Bay courtroom was seated, yet another in a long series of hearings to determine Shad's competency to stand trial continued. Shad's lawyer informed the judge that the doctor meant to testify that day had not yet completed the report. The lawyer asked for 2 more weeks for the testimony to take place. The judge reluctantly agreed to a trial delay, and a new date was set for 2 months later on May 15, 2023. It was a regular exchange with Shad calmly sitting beside her lawyer at the defense table when suddenly she launched out of her chair to her attorney and brutally struck his head. A courtroom deputy sprang into action and tackled her to the ground, but she continued to trash violently, wrapping her foot around a cord on his utility belt in the process. 2 more deputies arrived and they were eventually able to get this 5'2" woman under control. They sat her up against the door before bundling her out of the courtroom. Shad could get more charges added to her sentence for this assault. Is she looking for more grounds for her insanity plea? Only time will tell. Her husband Warren continues to stand behind her from behind bars. He posted a 2-page letter blaming Shad for giving his wife the illegal drugs that muddled her brain and caused her to kill Shad. According to him, Shad was not what the news made her out to be. If she is found guilty of committing a first-degree murder, she would get a life sentence in prison. For mutilating a corpse, she would pay a $25,000 fine or serve a 12-year and 6-month state jail term, or both.